We won't negotiate under pressure. The words of Iran's top leader after Donald Trump offered to talk about its nuclear program. The US president threatened war would be the alternative. So is another nuclear deal with Iran possible? And if so, on what terms? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Vaez. US President Donald Trump wants a deal with Iran over its nuclear program. He's reached out for talks while also tightening sanctions on Iran's economy. For now, Tehran says it won't negotiate under pressure. It was Trump who pulled the US out of the previous nuclear deal, saying it didn't go far enough. Is there now scope for a diplomatic solution that's acceptable to both sides? And what will it take to get them to the negotiating table? We'll go to our panel in just a few moments, but first this report from Fintan Monaghan.
Iran's leaders make their position clear. They view overtures by the Trump administration not as an invitation to talk about its nuclear program, but as a demand for concessions.
Some bullying governments insist on negotiations. Their negotiation is not aimed at resolving issues. They negotiate to dictate their will.
The US and other world powers say they want to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. President Donald Trump says he wrote a letter to Tehran seeking talks, but also said that other options are on the table.
Hopefully we can have a peace deal. You know, I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other, but the other will solve the problem.
The last time Trump came into office in 2016, a deal was in place. Iran had agreed to curb its nuclear activities in exchange for relief from sanctions. It was Donald Trump who pulled America out of the agreement, demanding further concessions on Iran's military capabilities and its backing of armed groups. With Trump back in office again, Iran expects more of the same.
The problem is not just the nuclear issue. They raise new demands that will definitely not be met by Iran. There will be demands about defense capabilities and international capabilities. They will urge Iran not to do certain things, not to meet certain people, not to go to a certain place, not to produce some items. Your missile range should not be more than a certain distance. Is it possible for anyone to accept these?
Iran has always denied it intends to develop nuclear weapons, saying its program is for civilian use. But since the collapse of the deal, Tehran has been increasing its enrichment of uranium. This could allow it to build a weapon more quickly if it decided to do so.
We need to engage as soon as possible because time is passing. You have seen my reports on the activities in Iran, the amount of enriched uranium at 60% is growing very, very fast. All of the activities are being carried out.
Iran's economy has been badly affected by sanctions for years, and the US is determined to tighten them even further. Without diplomacy, Tehran is likely to continue enriching uranium, which could put the two powers on a collision course. America wants talks, but for now, Iran isn't budging, until it believes an acceptable deal may be on the table. Fintan Monaghan, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guest today to discuss all of this in detail. From Alexandria in Virginia, Heino Klinck, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. From Tehran, Hamid Reza Gholamzadeh, Director of the House of Diplomacy, a think tank. And from Washington, D.C., Ali Vaez, Director of the Iran Project at the International Crisis Group. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. Ali Vaez, let me start with you. You're one of a small group of journalists and analysts who follow every twist and turn, because I read a lot of the stuff you write. I'd like your assessment. A new diplomatic overture. There's lots we don't know. We don't know what's in that Trump letter. But is there a reason for optimism right now?
It's good to see you, James. It's hard to imagine that there would be an opening as a result of the letter, because I think some of the structural problems that we have had in U.S.-Iran engagement, and we saw in the Trump administration's first term in office, I think still exist. Number one is this distinction that you have between Trump and the Trump administration. I think President Trump is absolutely interested in a mutually beneficial deal with the Iranian regime, but almost no one around him in his administration, at the White House, at the State Department, shares that objective. And some seek containment of Iran, some seek capitulation of Iran. And that's why you see a difference between the president's rhetoric and what is put on the paper in terms of, for instance, the memo that he signed 2 weeks into office, which reimposed maximum pressure of sanctions, which is the policy he pursued in his first term, and didn't result in a deal, only resulted in a much more repressive Iran at home, much more aggressive Iran in the region, and brought Iran's nuclear program to the verge of nuclear weapons. And then the second structural problem is that the administration's policy is still pressure first as a way of getting Iran to the negotiating table. And Iranians never negotiate with a gun to their head. And that's why 6 weeks into this administration, we're already at an impasse. And it doesn't matter who carries the message to Tehran, whether it's a letter or it's an intermediary. The problem is that Iran is reluctant to engage under pressure, and the Trump administration does not really pursue a diplomatic approach that is not pressure-centric.
Hamid Reza in Tehran, let me get the perspective from there. And let me just read you that quote from the Supreme Leader. Some bully governments insist on negotiations. Their negotiations are not aimed at solving problems, they aim at domination. Is that a no to Trump, or is the door still open?
Yeah, of course, it is a no to Trump as we are seeing the situation right now. Let's just begin with what Ali said about the way the message has been delivered, the letter. When President Trump sends the letter and immediately says it to the media, it shows two things. Either he doesn't know that what the political and diplomatic procedure is to send a letter to a country like Iran where they don't have any embassy, which makes it actually quite funny, and it means that you cannot discuss with that person diplomatically, and there's no ways for diplomacy. Or he knows and he wants to have a media pressure on Iran and put the pressure on Iranian side so that they would come to the table. That again is some sort of bullying, as the leader has mentioned. The point is that what Iranians are seeing from this side is that the policy is the same, to have the sticks and the carrots at the same time, and we don't have any carrots actually right now, to put the pressure on Iranians, to threaten Iranians to sign the executive memorandum, which is depicting what the policy would be, to have the maximum pressure again, to talk about even conventional weapons of Iran, and talking about the regional policy of Iran. So all the things that we are hearing from the Washington is something that says to Iranians that you cannot step forward for any negotiations because there is going to be no income for you, there is going to be no outcomes for you to bear any fruit for you. So yes, it is a no, because the Supreme Leader is very pragmatic in his foreign policy. He wants something that is real, and we haven't seen anything so far.
Heino, I mean, you heard there, the view from Tehran is it's sticks and no carrots. And it's worth saying that President Trump has already said he's reimposing his maximum pressure campaign. On the 6th of March, his Treasury Secretary said that he was going to collapse Iran's already buckling economy. The US apparently considering a plan in which it would ask its allies to stop and inspect Iran oil tankers, a sanctions waiver that allowed Iraq to pay Iran for electricity apparently looks like it's not going to be renewed. And on the 4th of March, there were joint exercises from the US and the Israeli air forces. I mean, it seems that these are not coincidences, are they, Heino?
Well, I think there is absolutely a strategy in the new Trump administration with regards to looking for an approach to the Islamic Republic of Iran. The president's letter is one aspect of that. I would offer that it does, in fact, open a door to potential negotiations. As always, the devil is in the details, whether it's from a Tehran perspective or from a Washington perspective. But I would say from an optimistic point of view, the president has taken the first step towards establishing some sort of, at least at this point, indirect dialogue. Yes, and there are carrots and there are sticks, perhaps more sticks right now than carrots. Anyone who's been involved in any type of international negotiations, particularly in the national security and defense arena between adversaries, knows that there is going to be a disincentive part of the negotiation. And, we see that now with the maximum pressure campaign being reinvigorated and reestablished vis-a-vis Iran. But let's remember that President Trump, in many respects, is an unconventional leader. He reached out to the leader of North Korea directly for talks that resulted in 3 in-person meetings. He has now reached out to the supreme leader of Iran. While I don't anticipate any movement in any types of direct or in-person negotiations in the immediate term, I think the one thing that you can expect and perhaps might even appreciate from President Trump is his willingness to try to tackle international issues, tensions, in a way that might be viewed as new and, again, unconventional.
Ali, with the caveat that we've only got President Trump's words in an interview with Fox Business and then in a freewheeling conversation on Friday with reporters in the Oval Office, it is interesting that in those comments that we haven't seen the letter, there is no mention of anything to do with Iran apart from the nuclear aspect. No mention of Iran's missiles and drones, no mention of Iran's regional alliances. Does that suggest to you that Trump might be seeking a narrow nuclear-only deal? And is that good news for Tehran?
James, I think if the Iranians would pay attention to what the president says and not what his administration does, they would have been much better off. And this is, I think, the lack of understanding of how this administration is different than Trump's first term, in the sense that there was resistance within the first Trump administration, which could obstruct elements of the president's policy, which now is really weakened. I mean, Trump is truly an imperial president and can get whatever he wants. And in that, there is a unique opportunity because Trump can strong-arm Congress into accepting deals with the Iranian regime that would be unpalatable for the Obama or Biden administration, or impossible to push through Congress. But Trump can achieve that. And I think the mistake that the Iranians are committing is that they don't pay attention to the 3 principles that President Trump repeatedly puts out there, which I think are good principles from the perspective of Tehran. One is that he says, I don't want regime change. Second is that he says, I don't want war. And third is that he says that I only want a nuclear deal. So regardless of what the White House puts in the memo, which are a bunch of maximalist demands, or a repackaging of the 12 demands that former Secretary of State Pompeo laid out in 2018 when the U.S. withdrew from the nuclear deal with Iran and imposed maximum pressure the first time around. Regardless of those conditions, if they would do what Kim Jong-un did, which was to engage President Trump, I think he's just so interested in that kind of theatrics or performative diplomacy that he would be willing to suspend pressure. But unfortunately, the Iranians don't see it that way. They pay attention to the maximalist demands in the memo, and that is the reason that we are now at an impasse again.
Hamid Reza, your reaction to that, there might be an opportunity here. Do you think they're going to believe that in Tehran, or are they going to believe that down the line Netanyahu is going to convince Trump that it needs to be a much tougher policy?
Iranians are watching the situation very closely. As you mentioned, the joint drill is part of the developments in the region. The memo is part of that. The remarks by people like Marco Rubio is part of the story. It's not just the letter that we don't know what the content is yet, and it's not just the words of the President Trump. We are seeing different things that are happening. So based on those developments, it doesn't seem that it is just an opportunity for talks. It seems more threats, and Iranians are not going to bow down to any threats, and they don't want to be threatened like that. Iran is very practical and pragmatic in its foreign policy. It wants to have negotiations only if there is going to be some results in that. So, for example, the sanctions are removed or lifted. So the point is that the threats at the time being is actually something that Iran cannot actually accept, because it seems that Iran is weakened in its regional policy. To some extent it has been, but it's not the way that the Americans and the Israelis and some other Western countries, for example, are thinking of, and it's not like that. The point is, the problem is that this miscalculation seems to be actually taken by the Israelis and the Americans to think about targeting Iranian facilities or attacking Iran. And this will bring a full-fledged war, actually. So Iran is watching closely to see what the steps are. If it is going to be defending itself, it will defend it completely. If it is going to be negotiations, if it is fruitful negotiations, it would go to that. The other guest mentioned about North Korea. Yes, they had 3 in-person meetings, but what was the result for the North Korean people and the country? Nothing. So Iran doesn't want just meetings and negotiations for the sake of negotiation. It wants negotiations for some results. It wants respect for some outcomes. It wants to sit at the table only if there is going to be something for its benefits and national interests and the interests of its people.
Heino, you were part of the first Trump administration. I'm interested in those around Trump, because Trump acts, I think, on his instincts, but he also sometimes is swayed by those who are advising him. And if you look at those who were part of the first administration, when he pulled out of the nuclear deal and really went for it with that maximum pressure, you had Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, you had John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, you had a chap called Brian Hook, who was the former Iran envoy. These people are no longer around Trump. In fact, they're banished from Trump's orbit. Does that say anything, do you think, about his Iran policy, or just that he's fallen out with those individuals?
Well, I would say that many of the top advisors to President Trump in the national security space during the second administration have some of the same types of leanings towards Iran as the leaders that were around President Trump in the first administrations. Again, Secretary Rubio and former Congressman Waltz have very strong views and frankly, on the record views on Iran and the role Iran has played internationally.
But Heino, let me just stop you there for a second. There's also that terribly close advisor, Elon Musk, who may not have a cabinet position. He met with the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations in November. There are different influences on Trump this time.
Yes, I'm not discounting that. And again, we're 6 weeks in. A lot of things still need to play out. But again, let me talk about the members of the national security team for President Trump. And I would not include Elon Musk as one of those. Again, Rubio and Waltz's positions are very, very clear. Even Secretary Hegseth's position at DOD has been very clear. So I don't see, frankly, that there's a lot of dichotomy there. Now, that being said, as your other guests have mentioned, number one, President Trump is, in fact, the commander-in-chief, and he will make his own decisions. So if that means perhaps not necessarily agreeing with certain cabinet members, he will do that. President Trump has demonstrated time and time again a willingness to engage in international affairs in a unconventional manner. Again, North Korea, one of the outcomes of his approach was a stop to North Korean nuclear tests and intercontinental ballistic missile tests. I also believe that one of the things that President Trump is absolutely a master at is leverage. And I would argue, despite your guest from Tehran saying that we are misinterpreting the regional environment, I think we have found in the last year that many elements of power and influence that Iran has wielded have been degraded in great measure. So I do believe that, at least from a U.S. perspective, the time is, in fact, ripe for trying to come to a negotiation with Tehran to see where there could be some sort of consensus between Washington and Tehran on approaching the fundamental issue of a potential nuclear capability for Iran's military, which is
Heino, you mentioned Iran regionally suffering and its influence waning, but the one thing that hasn't suffered, Ali, is its nuclear program, is it? And you read all these IAEA reports, so the rest of us don't have to. I had a look at them earlier on. According to November's IAEA report, Iran's stockpile of uranium then was 182.3 kilograms. It's now 274.8 kilograms. It's increased by about 50%. Iran is enriching faster than ever. How close is Iran to having a nuclear weapon right now, Ali?
So it literally would take Iran less than a week to enrich enough fissile material for a single nuclear weapon, enriching from 60% to 90%, which is really just a tiny, tiny step. And Iran can have an arsenal worth of fissile material enriched for nuclear weapons in the course of a month. So we're talking about 4 or 5 significant quantities for a bomb. And is at the rate that it's enriching to high levels now, it can basically have enough material for a single nuclear weapon every single month. So
but there's a stage, Ali, just to be clear, there's a stage not just of enriching it, getting the fissile material and getting it weapons grade, there's weaponizing it. I mean, how long does that bit take? And does the world see that bit? Because there are nuclear inspectors watching the enrichment, or at least trying to watch the enrichment, but they won't see the weaponization, will they?
That's right. Although Iran would have to move the fissile material away from oversight of the UN nuclear watchdog in order to weaponize, the weaponization process might take between 3 to 12 months. Nobody really knows for sure, but it could happen in secret. And if Iran decides that it wants to basically break out and sneak away some of this fissile material into secret facilities, the game is lost really at that point, regardless of how long it would take. And of course, that kind of provocative action could be a casus belli for Israel to take military action. And this is where I want to go to the point that Hamid Reza was making. That, you know, he's the head of the Center for Diplomacy, and in diplomacy, you always have to think about what's your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Iran, if you look at what President Pezeshkian was saying in terms of the country's economic situation just a few days ago, is basically bankrupt. And they're really struggling to keep the lights on. So not getting a deal for a foreseeable future, I'm not saying would result in regime collapse or economic collapse, but means much more misery and discontent within the Iranian population without Iran necessarily gaining more leverage. Because as I told you, Iran's program is now so advanced that there is very little headspace left for additional nuclear escalation that would not cross a US and Israeli red line. And we also have a ticking clock, which is different than the first Trump term, which is that the UN Security Council resolution that endorsed the 2015 nuclear deal between Iran and the world powers and has still kept the Iran file in the UN Security Council will expire in October. And if there is no deal that would cap and roll back Iran's nuclear program, basically the Europeans would have to snap back the UN sanctions starting this summer. And that means we would end up in a situation of a major non-proliferation crisis because Iran has promised to withdraw from the nuclear non-proliferation treaty if that happens. So when President Trump says, we don't have much time left, this is going to come to a head this year in 2025, he is right. And if Iran has a choice between engagement, even if engagement proves futile, and non-engagement, which is likely to lead to more economic misery and potentially military conflict, I think the choice is clear.
Hamid Reza, though, if it's a question of engagement or non-engagement, I'm getting signs, tell me if I'm right, that Iran might be moving in the direction of non-engagement. You had a reformist president elected back in June, but there have been developments in recent weeks. Zarif, the vice president, has resigned. The economy minister has been impeached. Would you say the position in Tehran is hardening against diplomacy?
Not against diplomacy, against, let's say, useless in diplomacy, we can say. We can say that unlike Rouhani's term, Ayatollah Khamenei is not handing the diplomacy and the decision over to the president and the government. It's taking everything in his own hand, we can say, at least the main policy. A few days ago, he clearly mentioned that there is going to be no the negotiations, and yesterday he again mentioned something in reaction to the news about the letter. We are expecting to have some reactions regarding the letter in a few days. The next meeting, I think, would be in a couple of days from now. So I would expect reactions, official reactions then. But it seems that he is taking everything into his own hand, and because, as I said, there is no time for trial and error. He wants to have some outcome for that. He is ready for diplomacy and for negotiations if it is pragmatic, if it is practical, if there is going to be something real on the ground. And it is ready to pay the price for that, because Iran has done everything to ensure the world that there is going to be no nuclear weapons. We have had the most inspections from the IAEA. There have been several reports by the IAEA that Iran has been actually committing, fulfilling all its commitments. So so far, Iran has been following all the orders within the JCPOA. It accepted all the inspections, but there was no outcome.
Thank you very much, Hamid Reza, and thank you to all our guests today, Heino, Klinck, Hamid Reza Gholamzadeh and Ali Vaez. We produce this programme every day of the year. You can see it on television, on demand on our website, aljazeera.com. And there's an audio podcast version too. If you have thoughts or comments, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or message us on X. Look for @AJ Inside Story. I'll see you again here very soon. But until then, from me, James Bays, and all the team here, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.